Well, hello, my friends. Today, sorry for I haven't done another video in quite a while, probably a couple weeks. Still not feeling very good. Anyway, um, I had a really enjoyable time with my latest read, The Cambridge Companion to Locke, edited by Vere Chappell. Um, I bought this book a long time ago when I was a professor, and I have actually four. I saw it downstairs in my bookshelves. I have four of these Cambridge companions. At least four, maybe I have five. No, wait, four. I also have the one on Hume, which I'm going to read very soon, and I have one on Plato and one on Plotinus. Actually, I'm wondering if I have one on Augustine too. But anyway, be that as it may, I really enjoyed this book. The only thing I can say, well, the first thing I can say is one good thing about being unemployed, being um, a cast off of society, is that it finally gives you a chance to read those books that you've been wanting to read forever. And again, as I said, like I bought this book, oh, maybe 10 years ago as a part of my just, wanting to be a good professor and, knowing the whole lay of the land. Um, I have a philosophy degree. I have one of my undergraduates is in philosophy. Obviously, it's a very large field, as every field is. And you study Locke, you study Hume, you study Kant, you study all these people. But I mean, my degree is I got that 25 years ago or 20 years ago, 25. Anyway, and you forget a lot of stuff. And I really enjoyed this read. Now it was difficult, and I say that even being me, someone who's obviously active academically and keeps up with his reading and stuff. I haven't studied Locke specifically in quite some time, and really not one of these early modern philosophers like we say, say Hume or Descartes or somebody in quite some time, and so you forget about the language and so on a little bit. You get a little bit rusty. I really enjoyed this read. I will say at first that it's a difficult book. It's a difficult book for the average reader. Not to say that you can't get something out of it. Mm, I'll put up the table of contents here, and you'll be able to see the different chapters. The most approachable chapters are the first chapter and the last chapter. The first chapter is about his life, and the last chapter is about his significance. And the book is really very well constructed as a total read through. I found that each chapter builds on the previous in a way that makes, it's a very logical progression. So I got to hand it to the editor for doing it that way. I suppose if you're only going to read one chapter from the whole book, read chapter 10, the last chapter, and Locke's significance. Um, Read it, and even if you don't have the philosophical background, store it in the back of your head. And as you progress in the field, you'll start to be able to put these details and these bits of information into the right place. So why did I read this book? Why did I do Locke rather than say Hume? Um, I think if you look at one philosopher, to be honest, the reason why I went back to Locke was I really wanted to. Uh, I've never been very interested in political philosophy. I shouldn't say never. I was as a young man, as a teenager. Um, but I wanted to know something about Locke's contribution to the American political philosophy. So that was probably why I put it up to the top of my book list. Um, and it was really good for that to give you kind of the basic lay of the land in that regard. Um, I think, like off the top of my head, if you had to pick three philosophers of the last 500 years who are most significant, in some particular order, you'd have to have Locke, Descartes, and Kant. The greatest of them is Kant. That doesn't mean he's the most significant, but probably the most significant would be, I suppose, Descartes for getting the whole ball rolling. But then, probably the most significant in for all the fields would be Locke, especially in the British tradition, the Anglo tradition, the whatever, and the British empiricist tradition or whatever. So I found this book to be a really great refresher, and also digging back into certain things that I wasn't too clear on. So why don't I just sort of look at the table of contents and then reflect on certain aspects that were helpful or whatever. So as I said, the first and last chapter are more, or less about his ideas and more about his life. It starts with his theory of ideas, and this gets right away to the heart of Locke's empirical methodology. So the most significant thing about Locke in the philosophical history is the most important thing about Locke's contribution to epistemology, and epistemology is the theory of knowledge, um, is his empiricist or empirical method. And he, for instance, basically got rid of any external notions of truth, in the sense that he he his idea was that there's nothing that we know that we gain other than through the senses. Okay, so this is significant because, well, first of all, doesn't it turn us to an empirical method, and you think about the contributions of empiricism in terms of the scientific method. Okay, and he was greatly influenced and encouraged by the contributions of Newton and so on at the time. Um, so basically, his idea is that there's so he stops and overturns the entire Platonic tradition, which is basically the entire philosophical tradition up until this moment. Uh, with he gets rid of the idea of innate ideas, that we are born with certain knowledge or certain propensities or certain um, whatever certain ideas are born with or whatever. And Plato was the first to come up with this, and of course he believed in reincarnation and all that stuff, and he believed that the knowledge that we have can only be explained by the fact that we already knew stuff. So, for instance, in Plato's dialogue Meno, he has this slave solve a geometrical uh, geometrical problem when he didn't have any mathematical training, for instance. So Locke Locke's idea is that we have to get rid of that completely. And it's funny, like whenever you're talking about Locke, you have to talk about Descartes. And even Descartes, as the first modern philosopher, he was still a part of the Platonic tradition, and um, he also believed that we had to cling to the old idea that there were innate ideas in us. And so Descartes would say that, for instance, our idea of God or whatever, these are sort of ideas that aren't reducible to our empirical experience, so our sensory experience in the world. So Locke was the one who turned that around. Okay, there's a chapter on his philosophy of body. Um, Locke was very much in this. I can't remember what the exact term is they use in this book, but basically, he he had the old. He advocated the old atomist idea of the Epicureans, that all matter is reducible to these these particles, or we would call them atoms today or whatever, or subatomic particles. um, and that, I mean, of course, he says we'll never know them. I mean, we only know because we'll never experience them exactly. We'll experience them through our senses, but we can never be sure what they are themselves. We don't have knowledge of them themselves. Um, so, um, philosophy of body, philosophy of mind, philosophy of language. This was an interesting chapter. Um, keep in mind Locke getting rid of the idea of getting rid of the theory of innate ideas, and think about what that would imply for his doctrine of knowledge, of his doctrine of language. So in this case, it's very funny. People wouldn't know this who aren't steeped in the historical philosophical tradition. Um, basically, that there was, for most of the Western tradition, this idea that language was a real reflection of things. So we see, for instance, in the book of Genesis, it says Adam gave the animals their names. So as if there was an actual correspondence between a thing and a name. So Locke is really the first to come along and say that names are just names, right? That they are not, there's no correspondence between the fact of the thing, because we don't know the thing, we only experience the thing, and the name we give to them. That names are in a way arbitrary. And one important thing that Locke said was that we have to keep in mind that there's no univocal knowledge, in the sense that we may use common words, but we don't necessarily mean the same things by them. That everybody has his own meanings, his own experiences, and we can't really know whether our names and our experiences correspond to anybody else's. So there's a real ontological break there. The traditional classical sense is the idea that names and concepts are real things. So think of Aristotle and his whole idea that the whole task of philosophy and science is to identify genus and species, so to give things the right name, right? According to the essence of the thing. Well, Locke says we don't know the essence of the thing. We'll never know the essence of a thing. We'll know what we decide is the essence of the thing in virtue of our experience of it through our senses. There's also a chapter here on Locke's philosophy of wisdom, of religion. And what's interesting or significant about Locke's theory of religion is he wrote his so-called letters on toleration. So the idea that it shouldn't matter politically what someone's religion is, whether they're Jewish or Protestant or Catholic or whatever. So that's significant. And the authors here tell us that Locke was, he wrote, for instance, on the reasonableness of Christianity, which is interesting in that here we have a full thing where we subject, like God is put in the place and becomes an object. So God and God's rules are to be judged according to their reasonableness, right? He didn't sort of mean it that way, but that's the effect, isn't it? That's the consequence. And the author said that Locke was, for instance, not a Trinitarian, and he was probably I might be misremembering this, but that he wasn't crazy about the idea of Jesus being God or whatever. But again, I'm not 100% sure on that. But he seems definitely not to have been a Trinitarian, because that's not reasonable, right? The idea that 3 and 1 can be the same thing is not reasonable. Okay. And then the next 2 chapters on his moral philosophy. He didn't make great contributions to moral philosophy. And then his political philosophy. And paradoxically and strangely, that even though this is one of the easier chapters, I found it one of the most difficult to read, because whereas with the difficult chapters on theory of ideas, philosophy of body, and so on, they're very overtly philosophical. So you put your whole self and you concentrate and you read. So that the thing is, with these difficult chapters, you're really paying attention and you're reading and rereading paragraphs just to make sure you got it right, because each paragraph builds on every other paragraph, and if you don't get it right, then nothing else makes sense. So with, for instance, his political philosophy, it's like it seems like a lighter topic. So like for me anyway, I wasn't paying attention as closely, so I think I didn't get as much out of it. But it was interesting in that, of course, at least according to the author of that chapter, um, this was very much a reflection of Locke's own age and time. And so, you know, when you think about it, this is Locke combating the idea of like the divine right of kings and so on. And so he very much is drawn on the experience, England's recent experience of executing kings and the priority of Parliament over the king. It's interesting, and it certainly gets you very thoughtful about our own modern context. So that's good in that. Um, One thing I found funny was that the author of the 10th chapter on Locke's influence was a little bit agnostic in terms of Locke's influence on the American system. So there's sort of a passing comment that it used to be believed that Locke was very fundamentally influential, and then the importance of his influence in recent times has been downplayed or whatever. So definitely, it'd be worth, like, if you wanted to read up on American political philosophy, so like James Madison and all these people, um, to look at their works and say, okay, well, what did Locke contribute to them and their understanding? Anyway, this book was really awesome, and again, pretty soon I'll review the Cambridge Companion to Hume. Um, and again, it's a difficult book. Should you start with this book, for instance, as opposed to actually reading Locke? Um, Six of one, half a dozen of the other, I suppose, in this sense. You have to get your feet wet. You got to dip your toes in. And with any discipline, it's very difficult starting off. So, but you got to start somewhere. So whether you're going to start with Plato's Republic, or you're going to start with Locke or Hume, or it doesn't really matter. You just got to start, and the language is difficult, and but you'll get used to it in time. Um, Overall, again, it's not an introductory book or whatever, but it's a wonderful overview. Okay, I feel great, um, getting sort of the basics of Locke back in my memory banks. And really, for me, I sort of had this epiphany, as you as I think you know, I've been for years, a couple years, I've been researching author's idea of their writing. You know, what is it? What is their writing project? How do they understand it? And I sort of had this recent thought, and this was the reason I went down and grabbed this book finally, was that I was thinking that you can't really study the authors, say, for instance, the novelists or the poets, without really understanding the givens of their age. And their givens of their age were certainly dictated by the popular philosophers' ideas of what knowledge is, you know, or what it's supposed to be. One thing the book says is that the 18th century was the century of Locke. And if you know anything, if you've ever read any Voltaire or whatever, Voltaire like looked at Locke. He was the man. And so in that sense, um, you know, anyway, I'm throwing that out there. So it's something I've been thinking about. Is it possible to have modern, the modern novel, um, romantic poetry, or even say 18th century poetry and so on, without Locke? Like, what was his influence, and how did he change things? One of the things said is that Locke disenchanted the world in a sense to a great extent, and that's certainly worth thinking about. Anyway, I don't want to throw out too many buzzwords or whatever because they're not very instructive unless you kind of are able to process them and put them in the right place or whatever. But anyway, awesome book. And my experience with the Cambridge Companions has always been very good. Um, so, again, if you want a refresher on Locke, that's a way to go. If you want to start dipping your toes in, read first chapter and read the 10th chapter, and then kind of wade in there and see what you can get out of it. But I feel amazing having read the book. I'm really happy, encouraged that things are really back in a good place. And hopefully, I'll be able to review the Cambridge Companion to Hume very soon. Okay, thanks, guys. Hope you're having a great day, great night, and we'll talk to you again real soon.